This is our time for our message for all ages, so if the children would like to come forward, those in age and in spirit. And I'm going to be reading a story that our sermon giver, Lisl Auf der Heide, has written. It's a children's story that hasn't yet been published, called The Little Fire Truck That Couldn't. So no pictures, sorry. But just think how exciting it is that Lisl can do all this kind of writing. She can write a sermon and a children's story and poetry. So here goes. One day, a new fire truck arrived at the firehouse. He was so new that his paint gleamed like satin and his headlights sparkled like stars. Well, well, what have we here? Said the big engine, who had been there the longest. A new truck? Don't touch, please, said Little Truck. You might scratch my paint. Aren't we snooty, said the hook and ladder truck. I suppose you think you're here for decoration. They all laughed. Just then the bell began to clang and firemen came sliding down the pole, jumped into trucks and fire engines and started off. What's going on? Cried Little Truck. It's a fire alarm, dopey, yelled Hook and Ladder Truck as he pulled out. That's what we're here for. But I'm afraid of fires, said Little Truck. I can't go. He was so scared that his motor refused to start when Jim the fireman turned the key. What could be the matter with this truck, wondered Jim. It's brand new and won't start. So he hopped out and got onto another fire engine and they left, sirens screaming. Oh dear, said Little Truck. Why didn't they tell me at the factory? I would never have chosen red had I known what it means. You don't want to go to the fire? Said a voice nearby. Who are you? Asked Little Truck. I am Spot, the firehouse dog. Pleased to meet you, Little Truck said politely. I'm afraid of fires, aren't you? Well, yes, of course I am. But my master has to go and fight fires and I want to be with him. But whenever the alarm sounds, he chains me before he leaves. And Spot rattled his chain to demonstrate. At least we can keep each other company while the others are away, said Little Truck. The next day, Jim checked Little Truck carefully. The motor purred, the ladder slid up and down smoothly, and the hose curled as it was supposed to. I can't understand it, Jim scratched his head. Yesterday, it wouldn't even start. Several days passed before the alarm sounded again. Darn, said Little Truck when the key turned in his ignition. Darn, said Spot when the chain was fastened. The bell clanged like mad, sirens screeched, and Little Truck honestly tried to overcome his fear, but he just couldn't. And after one or two feeble whirs, his motor stopped again. My master had to go without you, said Spot reproachfully when they were alone once more. I know, Little Truck said sadly, and I'm really sorry. Well, maybe next time, said Spot. But when his master returned at last, weary and covered with soot, Spot was pretty upset. Now, if he had a nice, new, decent truck to work with, he said pointedly as he tried to lick his master's sore hand. Little Truck bowed to try harder. Let's practice, suggested Spot one day. He got the firehouse cat to help them. When it meowed, that was supposed to be the siren. And when Spot rattled his chain, that was supposed to be the fire bell. Little Truck practiced eagerly. At the sound of the pretend bell, his engine started, and when the pretend siren sounded, his ladder slid up and his hose unwound without the slightest hesitation. Good for you, praised Spot. Now you'll surely make it. But when the real bell sounded that night, Little Truck just couldn't. After the other trucks had left, it was very quiet in the firehouse. I guess I'm just hopeless, whispered Little Truck into the silence. Oh, never mind, consoled Spot. Maybe you can get another job. You might be painted green and become a garden truck, or gray and be a garbage truck. All good, respectable jobs, added the cat. No, I'm afraid I'm a failure, said Little Truck. A whole week went by without an alarm, and Little Truck began to relax a little. And then there was a 3-alarm bell. Even the firehouse cat became frightened and was so confused she slid down the pole along with the firemen. Truck after truck roared out, sirens screaming, all except Little Truck, whose engine once again wouldn't start. Exasperated, Jim jumped into another truck. Then Little Truck realized that in the confusion, Spot's chain had not been fastened, and Spot had at last been able to follow his master. But Spot had no fire hat or fire jacket, and Little Truck knew it would be a big, dangerous fire. "Spot," he called, "Spot, come back." But Spot could not hear him. He was too far away. Just then, a tardy fireman came sliding down the pole. Little Truck was the only one left, so he jumped in, started the engine, the siren began to wail, and they raced toward the fire. "Wait for me, Spot," cried Little Truck, and at last he caught up with his friend. The fire was raging fiercely, but Little Truck hardly noticed. "Spot, Spot, jump in," he called. Spot nudged his master and guided him toward Little Truck. Ladders went up, hoses sprayed water, and soon the fire was out. "Are you all right, Spot?" Little Truck asked anxiously when he finally had a moment to rest. "Sure I am, and look how proud our master is of his shiny new fire truck," said Spot. "I won't be shiny and new for long at this rate," said Little Truck, shaking some cinders from his fender. But he didn't really mind, because now he knew that he could. The end. Don't go away. Yes?
Isn't it called the fire truck who couldn't?
That's the name of it, the little fire truck who couldn't. But in the end, he learned how, didn't he?
Well, then how does he know if it's called a different name that it goes?
How did he finally get started and finally be able to go? Well, that's one of my questions for you 3. Why do you think he got over his fear? Okay?
Because of his friends.
Because of his friend Spot. He was thinking about his friend more than about himself, and that made him forget about his fear and nervousness, don't you think? Have you ever been
Why is it called the fire truck who couldn't?
Because in the beginning he couldn't, and then finally he could. And it's a little bit of a takeoff on the story about the little engine that could. So I think Lisl made it be the little fire truck who couldn't. And then we wanted to see what that was all about, what it felt like to not be able to do something, and then finally be able to do it. Have you had that experience? Something you didn't know how to do, and then you learned how to do it?
That happens every day at school.
Every day at school, that's for sure. And whenever I have trouble being afraid of learning something new, I try to remember something I've already learned, like how to tie my shoelace, and then how to ride a bike, and then how to swim. And when I remember that, it seems so scary and frightening at first, and then
It's
when
not frightening, it's hard.
it's hard.
Because it's
Homework.
homework.
Homework can be hard. Anyway, we're happy for Little Fire Truck, and I thank you for coming up here to listen to
Before I
this.
start, I just want to share with you what a wonderful experience it is to stand up here and be able to look at all of your faces all at once. These are faces that I have grown to love so dearly, and now I can look at all of you, and that's really wonderful. Doesn't happen often. When I was a little girl, I knew only one really old person, my grandmother. She was so old, she took a nap every day and had time to tell me stories, take me for walks, teach me to knit, crochet, and embroider, things no other adult had time to do. She was actually only 70 years old when I was 7. But for my earliest memory until she died at age 91, she never seemed to change. Her hair was snow white in front, but the braid coiled around her head remained blonde. She always wore long black skirts over petticoats, both with pockets containing coins wrapped in paper, ready for the many beggars that came to her door, and high-topped laced shoes, shiny black. My mother sometimes told me that she remembered my grandmother in her younger years as hardworking, energetic, and often stern, trying to raise 7 children after the early death of her husband. But that was not the woman I knew. I could not imagine her ever being young, as I imagine my grandchildren probably can't think of me as young. Although she told me stories of her childhood and how, when she was only 5, her mother, in their large ranch near the German-Czech border, made her stand on a footstool to learn washing clothes in a huge wooden tub, taught her how to spin from thread from the flax grown on their ranch, and later how to weave it and help spread the linen fabric on the grass to be bleached by the sun. She showed me the much-mended handkerchief, which she still cherished and used, the last remnant of her dowry. I watched as she knitted this shawl I still cherish, and which by now is pretty badly mended too. Much later I wrote a poem about it. My grandmother's shawl. Tucked between daylight and dark were the hours of twilight, when my grandmother, rocking in her velvet-covered chair, told stories, her knitting needles a rhythmic undertone. Her fingers knew the intricate looping so securely, the slowly fading light never impeded her work. I loved the smell of warm wool rising from her basket, the rustle of her full skirt as it rubbed against the rocker, long shadows invading the room like friendly giants. She purled her tails into the purple shawl, knotted mysteries into twisted fringe, giant flowers emerging like magic. The shawl kept her warm through winters and wars and the gentle waning of flesh. And even now, when my aging fingers caress the purple web, my nose fills with the scent of warm wool in a secure room. My grandmother recalled how her grandmother, upon seeing the first steam engine pass through their town, sometime around 1870, came running into the house screaming, "It's the devil!" My grandmother told me how during the German-French War, her grandmother and other villagers waited for nightfall before venturing into the nearby battlefield to gather up the wounded. Once, the story goes, they rescued an enemy soldier, carried him into their house, and put him to bed. The following day, the enemy advanced, and before the French soldiers came to search for valuables, they hid theirs under the mattress of the comatose soldier. I'm sure much of my subsequent fascination with history came from these vivid tales she described during long twilight hours. To be in my grandmother's apartment was to be at peace. Her unwavering routine a framework for a feeling of security in great contrast to the stimulating but often overwhelming atmosphere my actress mother created. Grandmother didn't have opinions. She had knowledge, which it never occurred to me to question. She had wisdom she dispensed calmly and with a certainty that engraved it in my memory to this day. Some of the proverbs she lived by still ring in my head, both in German and in English. Nichts wird so heiß gegessen, wie es gekocht wird. Nothing is eaten as hot as it's cooked. In other words, nothing is as bad as it seems at first. Lügen haben kurze Beine. Lies have short legs. They're easy to catch. Der Mensch denkt und Gott lenkt. Man thinks, but God decides or guides. In Austria, church bells rang at 6 in the morning, at noon, and at 6 in the evening, and grandmother always stopped to pray, no matter what. Born and raised Catholic, as all our family and most Austrians were, she was deeply religious, but rarely attended church. Her God was loving, all-knowing, and at times stern, though not unforgiving. It was she who taught me the Our Father and Hail Mary, who was convinced that her beloved husband and the 4 children who preceded her were waiting for her in heaven, and who often said, God gives us no burden too great for us to bear, and believed it. Yet after she died when I was a young adult, I realized that even she had harbored fears, evidenced by the many notes in many places stating that she did not want to be buried, to become food for worms. Instead, she wished to be cremated, even though she knew that at that time the Catholic Church considered it a sin. Needless to say, her wishes were honored. Long before I could really picture myself as old, I hoped to be old the way I thought my grandmother was, calm, sure of myself, and above all, serene. I wanted to live a life that would leave legacies to those who knew me. I wanted to grow ever more secure in being a good person. Now that I am old, a grandmother of 5 and great-grandmother of 7.5, I don't feel much closer to that ambition than when I was 5. And I sometimes wonder if I were able to now ask my grandmother just how serene and secure she actually felt, what her answer would be. In the years since I put my grandmother on a pedestal, many have joined her there, some right here at Live Oak. Among them, Frida and Phil Kerr, with their witty comments and their always upbeat take on life. Budge George in his rich adventurous years in Alaska. Tonya Yao, who didn't stop living and giving until her last breath. And who could ever forget the sweet smile of Elise Murphy or the cheerful "Good morning" of Dave Prowl. They all, I feel sure, were gratefully aging and showing us how to do it. And then there's Betty White, still in the limelight. I wish I had half her energy. And Nelson Mandela, still overcoming and still gratefully aging. It's easy to forget that as recently as 100 years or so ago, life expectancy was often only between 40 and 50 years. And living as long as many more of us do now is really quite new. People who used to be thought of as old are now expected to take care of their aging parents. So how to grow old gratefully? Fortunately, oldness doesn't happen overnight. In order to get there, we have childhood, teenage, young adulthood, middle age, and of late, young old and old. Plenty of time to get used to the idea. But gratefully, what should we old folks be grateful for? Okay, the obvious first. It beats the alternative. But there's a lot more. When I open my eyes in the morning and look out my window, I feel so blessed to see birds of paradise glowing against the deep green of the mock orange, to hear mockingbirds sing their territory into safety, to realize I've been giving another day. For me, being able to live without an alarm clock is high on the list of things I'm grateful for. After feeding cat, dog, and myself, I take the dog for a walk. Not quite as long or as far as we used to, but enjoying the changing seasons, picking up a lemon here, and nobody in Santa Barbara should ever have to buy a lemon. An avocado there, smelling the neighbor's roses, being grateful for sunshine or rain. Often my friend and I explore different neighborhoods, see different sights, grateful for each other's company, for our joyful dogs, and the beauty of Santa Barbara. Meals were definitely more fun when there was someone to share them with, and I had greater energy to prepare complicated recipes. But food, although now more restricted, is still something I enjoy. And after lunch, at least a small amount of chocolate. What's not to be grateful for? One of the downsides of aging, besides the inevitable aches and pains, is that sleep tends to be more interrupted and at times just plain absent, which means I'm filled with gratitude when I do get a good night's sleep. I've often said that I'm really living way more than one life because I can visit so many interesting places and be with so many fascinating people, many of whom I've never met, in my dreams. That, fortunately, has not changed. However, if you think that the number of my years has blessed me with wisdom, I'm sorry to have to disappoint you. I was born with a giant question mark tattooed on my body, and no matter how often I've tried to erase it, no luck. In fact, although I have become smaller, it has grown bigger and bolder. Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? Some interesting transformations have occurred. When I was very young, the whole world revolved around me, albeit it was a very small world. The older I grew, the smaller I became, and the larger the world, which I eventually learned is really only a pinpoint in something much vaster called the universe, which scientists now believe is still expanding. So where does that leave me, and you, and you, and you? See, more questions. When the bearded deity of my childhood vanished, and I realized it wasn't Santa Claus who brought gifts, it was frightening at first to be on my own. No one up there to bail me out if I screwed up, which was most of the time, but also no one looking over my shoulder when I did. Heaven was closed, but so was hell. There was much I needed to learn, from what I wanted to do with this life I had been given, to with whom I would want to share it. The first part I'm still working on. The second walked into my mother's apartment in San Francisco one memorable afternoon. Transplanted from our native Austria at age 50, my mother wanted to exchange lessons in English for German ones. I was 17, hormones pouring out like waterfalls at the sight of the tall, lean college student who was obviously smitten with my beautiful mother and barely noticed me. I needed no deity to tell me how to fix that. And a year and a half later, Ralph and I eloped. Much later, I wrote this poem, and I called it I Do. Two strangers witnessed on a bright day in February in Judge Meekel's San Francisco flat the moment I became, with a narrow band of gold, became someone else. Even before I said it, I could feel my skin tighten as I grew inside it, my blue dress stretching across my breasts. Perhaps there is magic in those words, I do, for they open the walls wide, raise the sky, roll the sun, a fiery globe over banks of fog, let it glide into the bay. Holding hands, we ran down the stairs, down the steep hill, breathless to catch the cable car, the wind in our faces, feeling no chill as we rode elbow to elbow, squeezed between passengers, all of whom knew, must have known, that here was someone transformed, someone grown deep and still, moving into tomorrow. Through the proverbial thick and thin, we made it through 67 years of marriage, which only ended in 2008. Having death part us was something I cannot be grateful for. Abruptly, I was on my own as never before, feeling totally lost without the mate I loved so deeply and on whom I had depended for so many things. I realized that I had gained a little wisdom after all, which told me that I didn't have nearly enough to get through this by myself. With the help and support of Live Oak members, the grief group we started together, my family and my friends, I was able to survive. Another gift. During that first year after Ralph's death, I wrote a poem to him every day, and since then have put some of them into a book I titled, You Sent Me a Blue Butterfly. This testament to our journey together proved to be the best therapy, next to walking every day with my dog, where the beauties of nature aided in the healing process. I am grateful for my neighbors who are my friends, and my friends I can always count on when I need them. Among my greatest pleasures now is watching my great-grandchildren and the children of Live Oak grow and mature. I remember birthday parties when I was 5 or 6, where black and white cartoons were being shown on very scratchy film, and remember dreaming that maybe someday I might be able to watch movies in my own home. And lo and behold, now I can and I do, and I'm not ashamed to be grateful for it. I love television. My memories are what I'm most thankful for. Memories of babies born, toddlers learning to talk, starting school, finishing school, getting married, and having babies of their own. Memories of trips to my native Austria, to other parts of Europe in a VW camper, to Mexico, Guatemala, and to Canada. Memories of telephone booths on every corner, along with big blue mailboxes, of streetcars and manual typewriters, of the helmsman's bread truck, the fuller brush man, and milk delivered in glass bottles with thick cream on top. Memories of loved ones who have come and gone. Even memories of loss and pain are part of this, and I'm thankful I was able to live through them. Regrets? They mostly have to do with my not giving enough, never of giving too much, be it love, understanding, listening, yes, even things. I do regret that I never made it to the Far East, and that the world has not become a better place in spite of my sincere efforts. I leave you with a poem that sort of sums up this aging business as I see it. As we get older, the weather gets colder. We sit by the fire, turn the thermostat higher. Young folks look taller as newsprint gets smaller. Hillsides are steeper, valleys far deeper, and the walk to the store takes 10 minutes more. Winters grow longer, windstorms blow stronger. Summers go by in the blink of an eye. We forget to remember by the 1st of November the family member we saw in September. Yet we still can recall that 48 fall. We may need a snooze, have to lay off the booze, watch our girth and our weight, don't stay out too late. Corns on our feet throb in the heat. Their aches and their pains whenever it rains, and we can't understand why food tastes so bland. But when we read about drugs, about dropouts and thugs, hear the boom of hard rock that shakes our block, see many a youth despairing, uncouth, watch the government stumble and stocks take a tumble, we feel grateful and sage to be our age.